A lonely widow offered food to a homeless man, only to realize he's an angel sent to grant her wish. Eleanor Matthews hadn't intended to make such a discovery on that bitter December morning. The thought would have seemed absurd just hours earlier as she shuffled through her empty kitchen, the silence of her home pressing against her ears like cotton wool. The kitchen window had frosted overnight, geometric patterns spiraling across the glass like frozen ferns. Eleanor traced one with her fingertip, feeling the cold seep into her skin. 67 years old, with arthritic hands that ached more with each passing winter, and a heart that had been slowly calcifying since Robert's passing 3 years ago. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days to be precise. Not that she was counting. Her wedding ring caught the weak morning light as she moved to fill the kettle. Too loose now. She'd lost weight since Robert died. The doctors called it grief-induced anorexia, as if giving it a clinical name somehow made the hollow feeling inside her more manageable. Eleanor called it what it was, the absence of purpose. What was the point of cooking proper meals when there was no one to share them with? What was the point of anything, really? Outside, the first real snowfall of the season had transformed the neighborhood overnight. From her kitchen window, Eleanor watched as children bundled in colorful coats rushed out to play, their laughter carrying through the glass like echoes from another world. A world she no longer belonged to. She poured hot water over a tea bag, watching the amber color bloom and spread. The phone hadn't rung in 3 days. Her daughter, Catherine, living her busy life in Seattle with her husband and the grandchildren Eleanor barely knew, had promised to call last weekend. She hadn't. Eleanor understood. Life moved forward for the living, just not for her. She carried her tea to the living room, where dust motes danced in the shafts of winter sunlight. Robert's armchair sat empty, as it always did, the leather cracked on the armrests where his hands had rested for 39 years of marriage. The remote control still on the side table where he'd left it that last evening, before the stroke took him in the night. Some things Eleanor couldn't bear to move. The mantel clock ticked loudly in the silence, marking each empty second. She sat in her own chair, smaller than Robert's, tucked beside the window overlooking the street. Her routine, such as it was: tea and toast in the morning, watch the world outside, dust the photographs, listen to the radio, take a short walk if her hip wasn't bothering her too badly, dinner alone, bed by 9, day after identical day. She was halfway through her tea when she saw him, a man, huddled on the bench at the bus stop across the street. He wore a threadbare coat, much too thin for the December cold, and clutched what looked like a small backpack to his chest. No hat, no gloves. His head was bowed, but even from a distance, Eleanor could see he was shivering. The bus wasn't due for another hour. She knew the schedule by heart, though she rarely used public transportation herself these days. Something about the slump of his shoulders struck her, not just cold but defeated. She knew that posture intimately, had seen it in her own reflection. Before she could think better of it, Eleanor was on her feet. The kettle was still hot. She made a second cup of tea, stronger this time, with 3 sugars. From the refrigerator, she took the sandwich she'd made yesterday and forgotten to eat, egg salad, Robert's favorite. She wrapped it carefully in wax paper. Her coat hung by the door, a sensible wool thing Robert had given her for Christmas the year before he died. She slipped it on, transferring the tea to a thermos and tucking the sandwich into her pocket. Her hip protested as she stepped outside, the cold air stealing her breath. The snow crunched beneath her boots as she crossed the street. The man didn't look up as she approached, even when her shadow fell across him. "Excuse me," Eleanor said, her voice cracking from disuse. When was the last time she'd spoken aloud? To the cashier at the grocery store, perhaps, 3 days ago? The man lifted his head slowly. Eleanor had expected what? Roughness. Dirt. The marks of hard living. But the face that turned toward her was surprisingly gentle. Weathered, yes, with lines that spoke of hardship, but his eyes, a clear, startling blue, seemed to hold a light that didn't match his circumstances. "I thought you might like something warm." She held out the thermos, suddenly feeling foolish. What was she doing approaching a stranger like this? "And a sandwich, if you're hungry." For a long moment, he simply looked at her, those blue eyes seeming to see right through her facade of neighborly concern to the lonely truth beneath. Then he smiled, and something in Eleanor's chest shifted, like ice breaking on a frozen pond. "That's very kind," he said, his voice soft but clear, unmarked by the slur of alcohol she had half expected. He accepted the thermos with hands that were chapped and red from cold. "Thank you. You shouldn't be out in this weather without gloves." she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Mother hen words. Robert used to tease her about her fussing. The man's smile deepened, creasing the corners of his eyes. No, he agreed. But sometimes we find ourselves without the things we need most. The way he said it, something in his tone made Eleanor think he wasn't just talking about gloves. The bus won't be here for an hour, she heard herself saying. My house is just there. You could warm up inside if you'd like. The invitation surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. Eleanor Matthews, who hadn't had a visitor in over 2 years, inviting a homeless stranger into her home? Robert would have been shocked. Catherine would be horrified. But the man looked at Eleanor's house across the street, then back at her face, and that gentle smile never wavered. I would appreciate that very much, Mrs. Matthews, she supplied. Eleanor Matthews. Eleanor, he repeated as if tasting the name. I'm Gabriel. Gabriel. Like the archangel, she thought, but didn't say. There was something almost luminous about him, despite his shabby appearance, a presence that made the cold air around them seem less bitter. Well, come along then, Gabriel, she said, turning back toward her house. Before we both freeze to death out here. He followed her across the street, his footsteps nearly silent in the snow behind her. Eleanor felt a flutter of trepidation as she unlocked her front door. What was she thinking, bringing a stranger home? But the feeling dissipated as Gabriel stepped into her entryway and carefully wiped his worn boots on the mat. You have a lovely home, he said, looking around with genuine appreciation at what Eleanor knew was a dated, somewhat shabby interior. Nothing had been updated since Robert's death. The wallpaper in the hallway was beginning to peel in one corner. It's old, she said, helping him out of his thin coat. Up close, she could see it was not just threadbare but actively falling apart at the seams. Like me. Gabriel turned those clear blue eyes on her. Age brings character, he said, to houses and to people. The simple statement, delivered without flattery or condescension, brought unexpected warmth to Eleanor's cheeks. Well, she said, flustered, come sit by the radiator. I'll make fresh tea. In her kitchen, Eleanor moved with more energy than she had in months, pulling out not just tea, but the tin of shortbread cookies she'd been saving for. What? Some special occasion that would never come? She arranged them on a plate, added the sandwich, and carried the tray to the living room. Gabriel sat not on the sofa where she'd directed him, but on the floor near the radiator, his back against the wall, knees drawn up. He looked at her with a hint of apology. I hope you don't mind. It's been a while since I felt real warmth. Eleanor set the tray on the coffee table. Of course I don't mind. But please take the couch. It's much more comfortable. Gabriel shook his head. This is perfect, truly. He reached for the tea she offered, wrapping his hands around the mug as if it were precious. Steam rose between them like a veil. Have you been? Eleanor searched for a delicate way to phrase it. Without a home for long? Gabriel took a sip of tea before answering. I travel where I'm needed, he said. Sometimes that means I don't have a fixed address. An unusual way to describe homelessness, Eleanor thought. He spoke like an educated man. Perhaps he'd fallen on hard times? Lost a job? She'd read about how quickly it could happen these days. And what brought you to Mapleton? Their town was small, unremarkable, not the sort of place drifters typically landed. Gabriel met her eyes over the rim of his mug. You did, Eleanor. The simple statement sent a peculiar shiver down her spine. I don't understand. You will, he said, reaching for a cookie. This is wonderful, by the way. Did you make it? The abrupt change of subject left her momentarily disoriented. No, I used to bake. Before? Store-bought now, I'm afraid. Before your husband died, Gabriel said. Not a question. Eleanor stiffened. How did you know about Robert? Gabriel's expression remained gentle, but something shifted in his eyes. A deepening, like looking into clear water and suddenly realizing its depth. The photograph on your mantel, he said, nodding toward the silver frame. You look very happy together. Eleanor followed his gaze to the wedding photo. Robert, so handsome in his suit, looking at her as if she were the center of his universe. And she, young and radiant in lace, unaware of how fleeting happiness could be. We were, she said softly, for 39 years, her voice caught. He died before our 40th anniversary. Gabriel nodded, as if this was information he already possessed. A good man, he said. A good life together. Yes. Eleanor found herself blinking back unexpected tears. How strange to be discussing Robert with this man she'd just met. Stranger still how right it felt. But that's over now. Is it? Gabriel asked, his head tilted slightly. Over? The question hung in the air between them, oddly weighted. Before Eleanor could respond, a sharp gust of wind rattled the windows, drawing her attention outside. The snow was falling more heavily now, thick flakes swirling in the strengthening wind. "It's turning into a proper storm," she observed. "I don't think the buses will be running much longer." Gabriel followed her gaze to the window. "No," he agreed. "I don't think they will." Concern creased Eleanor's brow. "Where were you planning to go?" "Where I'm needed?" He repeated that same cryptic answer. Eleanor made a decision then, one that would have astonished her just hours earlier. "You'll stay here tonight," she said firmly. "I won't have you out in a blizzard. I can make up the guest room." A guest room that hadn't been used since Catherine's last visit over a year ago. Sheets that would need airing, dust to be wiped away. But the thought of preparing the room gave Eleanor a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. Gabriel studied her face, his expression unreadable. "You're not afraid to have a stranger in your home overnight?" Eleanor considered this. Should she be afraid? Conventional wisdom said yes. But there was something about Gabriel that inspired not fear, but its opposite, a curious sense of security. "No," she said truthfully. "I'm not afraid of you." His smile returned, warming his face. "Then I accept your kind offer, Eleanor Matthews." As the day progressed into evening, Eleanor found herself talking more than she had in years. Gabriel was an attentive listener, drawing her out with careful questions about her life, her marriage, her daughter in Seattle. He helped her prepare a simple dinner, soup and bread, warmed in the oven, moving around her kitchen with surprising grace for a man his size. There was something comfortable about his presence, as if he'd always belonged in the empty space of her home. When he asked about the photographs on the wall, Eleanor found herself sharing stories she'd thought forgotten. Robert teaching Catherine to ride a bicycle, family vacations to the lake, the Christmas Robert had surprised her with a puppy that grew into the beloved family dog for 14 years. "You've had a life filled with love," Gabriel observed as they sat in the living room after dinner, the wind howling outside. "That's a rare blessing." Eleanor looked down at her hands, the liver spots and prominent veins betraying her age. "Yes," she agreed. "But what good is a past filled with love when your present is empty?" Gabriel was silent for a long moment. "What is it you wish for most, Eleanor?" he finally asked. "If you could have anything at all?" The question caught her off guard. Wishes? At her age? "I don't know," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she recognized them as untrue. She did know. The wish lived in her heart every day, growing sharper with each passing month of solitude. "To matter to someone again," she whispered, the truth of it aching in her chest. "To not be forgotten." Gabriel's eyes held hers, so blue they seemed almost luminous in the lamplight. "You think you've been forgotten?" "I know I have." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "My daughter calls out of obligation." The neighbors nod but never stop to chat. "My friends from before, they've moved on. Or died. When Robert was alive, I had purpose. I mattered. Now." She gestured to the empty room. "Now I'm just waiting to die." The starkness of her words hung in the air between them. Eleanor hadn't admitted this to anyone, hadn't even fully admitted it to herself until this moment. "I see," Gabriel said, and something in his tone made Eleanor think that he truly did see, right down to the hollow core of her loneliness. "And what would you do, Eleanor Matthews, if you were to matter again? If you were to have purpose?" Eleanor hadn't expected the question. What would she do? The possibilities seemed both vast and non-existent. "I don't know," she said again, but her mind was already spinning with half-formed ideas. "I used to volunteer at the library, reading to children. I was good at it. They liked my different voices for the characters." A small smile touched her lips at the memory. "And I used to bake for the church fundraisers. My apple pie won blue ribbons 3 years running at the county fair." "Sounds like you had many gifts to share," Gabriel observed. "I suppose I did." Eleanor's smile faded. "But that was before." "I'm too old now, too set in my ways. Who would want what I have to offer?" Gabriel leaned forward, his expression suddenly intent. "What if I told you that you're exactly what someone needs? That your particular gifts, your kindness, your experiences, your capacity for love, are precisely what would make all the difference in a life that's struggling?" Eleanor blinked at him, confused. "I don't understand." "No," Gabriel agreed, settling back in his chair. "Not yet." "But you will." He glanced at the mantel clock. "It's getting late and you're tired. Perhaps we should continue this conversation tomorrow?" Eleanor realized with surprise that it was nearly 11, hours past her usual bedtime. Yet she didn't feel tired. Quite the opposite. She felt more awake, more present in her own skin than she had in years. Still, the suggestion was reasonable. She showed Gabriel to the guest room, provided a set of Robert's old pajamas, too painful to donate, too precious to discard, and fresh towels for the morning. "Thank you, Eleanor," Gabriel said as she turned to leave. "For everything." Something in his voice made her pause at the door. "Why do I feel like I know you?" she asked impulsively. "We've only just met, but there's something familiar about you." Gabriel's smile was gentle. "Perhaps because kindness is always familiar, even between strangers." "Good night, Eleanor." Eleanor slept deeply that night, without the aid of the pills her doctor had prescribed for insomnia. She dreamed of Robert, not as she usually did, cold and still in his hospital bed, but young and laughing, telling her to open her eyes, really open them. She woke to the smell of coffee brewing. For one disoriented moment, Eleanor thought Robert was in the kitchen, waiting with her morning cup as he had done every day of their marriage. Then memory returned. The homeless man Gabriel, staying the night to escape the storm. The storm. Eleanor went to the window and pulled back the curtains. The world outside was transformed, buried under at least a foot of snow that still fell steadily from a steel-gray sky. The street was unplowed, the power lines drooping under the weight of ice. Wrapping her robe more tightly around herself, Eleanor made her way downstairs. The kitchen was warm and bright, Gabriel standing at the stove where a pan of something that smelled heavenly was sizzling. "Good morning," he said without turning around. "I hope you don't mind. I found eggs and some vegetables in your refrigerator." "Not at all," Eleanor said, amazed at how normal it felt to have this stranger cooking in her kitchen. "Though I'm surprised the power is still on with this storm." "We've been fortunate," Gabriel agreed, sliding a perfect omelet onto a plate. He turned and placed it on the table, pulling out a chair for her. "Please, eat while it's hot." Eleanor sat, suddenly aware of her rumpled appearance, hair uncombed, face unwashed. She hadn't bothered with such things in a long time. What did it matter when no one saw her? But now someone was seeing her, serving her breakfast with a care she'd almost forgotten could exist. "Aren't you having any?" she asked as Gabriel poured her coffee. "I've eaten," he said, though Eleanor hadn't heard him cooking earlier. "The snow is quite bad. I think we may be housebound today." Eleanor repeated, tasting the unfamiliar word. How long had it been since there was a "we" in this house? "I suppose we are." Gabriel settled across from her at the table, watching as she took her first bite of the omelet. It was delicious, fluffy, perfectly seasoned with herbs she didn't remember buying. "This is wonderful," she said between bites. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "Here and there," Gabriel said, that same cryptic tone creeping into his voice. "I've had many opportunities to learn different skills." Eleanor studied him in the morning light. Clean-shaven, his hair, a mix of sandy brown and silver, neatly combed. Robert's pajamas fit him surprisingly well. If she hadn't met him shivering at a bus stop, she would never have guessed he was homeless. There was a dignity about him, a presence that seemed at odds with his circumstances. "Gabriel," she said slowly, setting down her fork. "Who are you?" "Really?" His blue eyes met hers without hesitation. "Who do you think I am, Eleanor?" A strange question. Eleanor considered it, remembering her first impression of him in the snow, that curious sense of recognition. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I feel as if you're here for a reason. As if—" she hesitated, feeling foolish. "As if you were sent." Gabriel's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Approval, perhaps. "And if I were?" he asked softly. "Sent for a reason, that is?" Eleanor should have laughed at the idea. Should have dismissed it as the fancy of an old woman too long alone. Instead, she found herself considering it seriously. "I'd ask why," she said finally. "Why me? I'm nobody special." Gabriel's face softened. "That," he said, "is where you're very much mistaken, Eleanor Matthews." Before she could ask what he meant, the telephone rang, a jarring sound in the quiet kitchen. Eleanor couldn't remember the last time it had rung before noon. "Excuse me," she said, rising to answer it. "That's probably Catherine checking on me because of the storm." But it wasn't Catherine's voice that greeted her when she lifted the receiver. "Mrs. Matthews? This is Diane Wilkins from next door. I hope I'm not calling too early." Eleanor blinked in surprise. Diane and her husband had moved in 2 years ago, but beyond polite nods when retrieving the mail, they'd barely spoken. "Not at all," Eleanor said. "Is everything all right?" "Well, not exactly," Diane said, sounding harried. "Our power went out about an hour ago. The electric company says it could be days with this storm, and we have a serious problem. Our daughter Sophie has diabetes, and her insulin needs to be refrigerated. I noticed your lights are still on. Yes, we still have power, Eleanor confirmed, glancing at Gabriel, who watched her with that same gentle expression. I hate to impose, Diane continued, but I wondered if we might store her medication in your refrigerator until our power returns. We'd be so grateful. Eleanor found herself nodding before she'd even consciously decided. Of course, she said. In fact, why don't you all come over? It's too cold to stay in a house without heat. The offer slipped out naturally, as if Eleanor invited neighbors into her home every day, rather than a woman who had carefully cultivated her isolation for 3 years. There was a startled pause on the other end of the line. Are you sure? That's incredibly kind, but we wouldn't want to intrude. I'm certain, Eleanor said, surprising herself with her firmness. Please, bring what you need for the day at least. And Sophie's medication, of course. After arranging the details, Eleanor hung up and turned to find Gabriel smiling at her. That was very generous, he said. Eleanor fidgeted with the cord of the telephone. It seemed the right thing to do. Yes, Gabriel agreed. It was exactly right. Within 30 minutes, the Wilkins family arrived at Eleanor's door. Diane, her husband Mark, and 10-year-old Sophie, bundled against the cold and carrying backpacks of essentials. We can't thank you enough, Mrs. Matthews, Mark said as they stomped snow from their boots in the entryway. The temperature in our house was dropping fast. Please call me Eleanor, she said, helping them with their coats. And it's no trouble at all. Sophie, a small girl with dark braids and serious eyes behind pink-framed glasses, looked curiously at Gabriel, who stood in the doorway to the living room. Who are you? She asked directly, in the way of children who haven't yet learned to filter their questions. This is my friend Gabriel, Eleanor said before Gabriel could answer. The word friend felt right on her tongue, though they'd known each other less than a day. Gabriel crouched to Sophie's level, extending his hand. It's very nice to meet you, Sophie. I understand you have a special medicine that needs to stay cool? Sophie nodded solemnly, holding up a small case. My insulin. Mom says if it gets too warm, it won't work right. Well, we'll make sure it stays perfectly cool, Gabriel assured her. And you know what else stays cool in the refrigerator? The ingredients for pancakes. I was just about to make some. Would you like to help? Sophie's serious expression bloomed into a smile. Can I? Mom, can I help make pancakes? Diane looked from her daughter to Gabriel with slight reservation. I'm not sure we should impose further. Nonsense, Eleanor interjected, feeling a spark of her old confidence returning. Gabriel makes wonderful food, and I'm sure he'd appreciate a helper. Meanwhile, why don't you and Mark warm up in the living room? I'll bring coffee. To her own ears, Eleanor sounded like her former self, the woman who had hosted dinner parties and church gatherings, who had taken charge and made people feel welcome. That woman had been buried with Robert, or so she'd thought. Perhaps she had only been dormant. The morning unfolded in a way Eleanor could never have predicted 24 hours earlier. Her quiet house filled with voices, Sophie's excited chatter from the kitchen as Gabriel taught her to flip pancakes, Mark and Diane's grateful conversation in the living room. Eleanor found herself moving between groups, refilling coffee cups, locating extra blankets, feeling useful in a way she hadn't in years. When Gabriel and Sophie emerged from the kitchen with plates of golden pancakes, the little girl was beaming with pride. I flipped them all by myself, she announced. Gabriel said I'm a natural. They look delicious, Eleanor praised, something warm unfurling in her chest at the child's joy. They ate together in the living room, the storm raging outside while inside, a different kind of storm was breaking in Eleanor's heart. The ice of isolation cracking apart, letting in light and warmth she'd forgotten could exist. After breakfast, Sophie discovered Eleanor's collection of board games, untouched since Catherine's childhood. Soon the coffee table was covered with the colorful board of Candyland, Sophie's delighted squeals filling the room each time she drew a favorable card. I haven't played this in ages, Diane admitted, moving her piece along the rainbow path. We're always so busy with work and Sophie's activities. Sometimes it takes a storm to make us slow down. Gabriel observed from his place on the sofa, where he seemed content to watch rather than participate. Eleanor, sitting cross-legged on the floor despite her arthritic hip, caught his eye over Sophie's head. There was something in his expression, a knowing look that sent another of those curious shivers down her spine, as if he'd orchestrated not just this game, but the entire situation. The day passed in a blur of simple pleasures Eleanor had forgotten could exist. Mark found Robert's old chess set and taught Sophie the basic moves. Diane discovered Eleanor's collection of classic novels and curled up with Jane Austen in the window seat. Gabriel moved through it all with quiet presence, helping Eleanor prepare lunch, suggesting activities when boredom threatened, stepping back to observe when things flowed naturally. By late afternoon, the snow had stopped, though the streets remained impassable. Eleanor's phone rang again. This time it was the Hendersons from across the street, also without power, asking if Eleanor's offer to the Wilkins might extend to them. Of course, Eleanor said without hesitation. Bring what you need. By evening, Eleanor's home housed 3 families, the Wilkins, the Hendersons with their teenage twins, and the elderly Chens from 2 doors down. Gabriel had somehow produced enough food from Eleanor's modestly stocked pantry to feed everyone, turning the impromptu gathering into something that felt like a festive occasion rather than an emergency shelter. The living room buzzed with conversation, children sprawled on the floor playing games, adults sharing stories and concerns about the storm. Eleanor moved among them, providing tea and coffee, finding extra pillows, listening to Mrs. Chen's worries about her cat, left at home with extra food. I'll check on your cat first thing tomorrow, if the roads are clear enough to walk, Eleanor promised. What's her name? Blossom, Mrs. Chen said gratefully. She likes the treats in the blue container on the counter. Eleanor nodded, making a mental note. It felt good to be needed, to be useful, to matter. It wasn't until nearly midnight, when everyone had settled into makeshift beds throughout the house, that Eleanor found herself alone with Gabriel in the kitchen, washing the last of the dishes. You've been extraordinary today, he said quietly as she handed him a plate to dry. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm at the praise. I've done nothing special, just opened my home. You've done much more than that, Gabriel countered. You've opened your heart, after keeping it closed for so long. Eleanor's hands stilled in the soapy water. How do you know that? Gabriel set down the dish towel and turned to face her fully. In the dim light of the kitchen, his blue eyes seemed to hold an inner luminescence. I told you I go where I'm needed, he said softly. You needed to remember who you truly are, Eleanor. Not just Robert's widow. Not just Catherine's forgotten mother. But Eleanor Matthews, a woman with gifts to share, love to give, purpose to fulfill. Eleanor felt a trembling begin deep inside her, not from fear but from something like recognition. Who are you? She whispered again. But this time the question held a different weight. Gabriel smiled, and in that smile was a light that couldn't be explained by the kitchen bulb overhead. You called me an angel when we met, he said. In your thoughts, not aloud. Eleanor's breath caught. She had thought that fleetingly when he'd first told her his name. Gabriel, like the archangel. That's not possible, she said, but even as the words left her lips, she knew they weren't true. Something had been unusual about Gabriel from the moment she spotted him at the bus stop, something that defied ordinary explanation. All things are possible, Eleanor, Gabriel said gently. Even second chances at life. Even purpose found when you thought all purpose was lost. Eleanor's hands gripped the edge of the sink, suddenly needing support. You're saying you're actually an angel? Sent to help me? Gabriel's expression remained serene. I'm saying that sometimes the universe responds to the deepest wishes of the heart. You wish to matter again, to not be forgotten. He gestured to the house around them, filled with people who had found shelter in her generosity. Look what happened when you simply opened your door. Eleanor's mind spun. Was she losing her grip on reality? Hallucinating from loneliness? Or was something truly miraculous happening? I don't understand, she said weakly. Gabriel stepped closer, and Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace emanate from him, a tangible aura of tranquility that eased the chaotic thoughts in her mind. You don't need to understand everything, he said. Just know this, the wish in your heart has been heard. The path to fulfilling it began the moment you chose kindness over isolation, when you offered food to a stranger despite your own emptiness. Eleanor thought back to that moment, standing in the snow, extending the thermos to the shivering man. Such a small gesture. How could it have led to all this? What happens now? She asked, her voice barely audible. Gabriel's smile deepened. Now you continue. You've remembered who you are, Eleanor Matthews. You've remembered what it means to give, to connect, to belong. Tomorrow, these people will still need you. And others will too, once the storm passes. But you... Eleanor couldn't complete the thought. I'll go where I'm needed next, Gabriel said simply. My work here is nearly done. A profound sadness washed over Eleanor at the thought of his departure. In just one day, Gabriel had become central to her world, a catalyst for change, yes, but also a friend. Perhaps the first real friend she'd made since Robert's death. "I wish you could stay," she said, the words escaping before she could censor them. Gabriel's expression softened with compassion. "Some visitors are meant to be temporary, Eleanor. Their purpose is to remind, to awaken, to guide, not to remain." He took her hand in his touch warm and surprisingly solid for a being she was beginning to believe might not be entirely human. "But the connections you've made today, those can last. If you nurture them." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face, kind, gentle, luminous, with an inner light that seemed to grow stronger the longer she looked. "Thank you," she whispered, inadequate words for the gift he'd given her, the gift of herself, rediscovered. Gabriel squeezed her hand once before releasing it. "Get some rest, Eleanor. Tomorrow will be a busy day." Eleanor slept deeply that night, despite the house full of guests, despite the extraordinary conversation in the kitchen. She dreamed again of Robert, but this time he was walking away, smiling over his shoulder, gesturing for her to turn around. To look forward, not back. She woke to sunlight streaming through her window. The storm finally passed. For a moment she lay still, listening to the sounds of her home, voices in the kitchen, water running, the clatter of dishes. Life, where there had been only silence for so long. Eleanor rose, dressed with care for the first time in months, even applying a touch of lipstick she found in the back of her drawer. When she descended the stairs, she found her guests already busy, Mark and Mr. Henderson attempting to fix her leaky faucet, Diane and Mrs. Chen preparing breakfast, the children setting the table. But Gabriel was nowhere to be seen. "Has anyone seen Gabriel this morning?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. The Wilkins exchanged a look of confusion. "Gabriel?" Diane asked. "Who's that?" Eleanor stared at them, bewildered. "Gabriel, the man who was staying here. He made pancakes with Sophie yesterday." Sophie looked up from folding napkins. "I made pancakes with you, Mrs. Matthews. You showed me how to flip them without breaking them." Eleanor felt the room tilt slightly. Had she imagined him? But no, the Wilkins had spoken to him when they arrived, hadn't they? "Excuse me," she murmured, making her way to the guest room where Gabriel had slept. The bed was made perfectly, the borrowed pajamas folded neatly on the pillow. No sign that anyone had stayed there, save for a single white feather resting atop the folded clothes. Eleanor picked it up with trembling fingers. Too large for any common bird, it seemed to shimmer slightly in the morning light, as if dusted with microscopic diamonds. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room, closing her fingers gently around the feather. When she returned to the kitchen, she found Mr. Chen on her landline, speaking with the power company. "They say electricity should be restored to most homes by this afternoon," he reported as he hung up. "The plows are out clearing the main roads now." "That's wonderful news," Eleanor said, slipping the feather into her pocket. She would examine the mystery of Gabriel later. For now, there were people who needed her. Who would like more coffee while we wait? The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. As promised, Eleanor checked on Mrs. Chen's cat, then found herself offering to look in on the pets of other neighbors without power. The Wilkins returned home once their electricity was restored, but Sophie appeared at Eleanor's door 2 days later, asking if she could learn to make cookies. "Mom says you probably know how to make the best ones," she said hopefully. "And I want to bring some for my class Valentine's party." Eleanor found herself scheduling regular baking lessons, not just for Sophie, but eventually for 3 other neighborhood children whose parents worked full-time. Her kitchen, silent for so long, filled with laughter and the sweet scent of vanilla and chocolate. Diane invited Eleanor to join their family for Sunday dinner. The Chens asked her to feed Blossom during their weekend trip to visit their son. The local library, learning that the former Children's Story Hour volunteer was active again, called to ask if she might consider returning. Life rushed back in a torrent, filling the empty spaces that grief had hollowed out. Each morning, Eleanor woke with purpose. Each night, she fell asleep with the satisfied exhaustion of a day well lived. 1 month after the snowstorm, Eleanor sat in her living room, writing in a journal she'd begun keeping. Outside, the first crocuses of spring pushed through the melting snow in her garden. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Catherine standing on her porch, suitcase in hand. "Mom," her daughter said, her expression a mix of apology and hope. "I should have called first, but I was afraid you'd tell me not to come." Eleanor stared at her only child, the daughter who had gradually slipped away after Robert's death, unable to cope with her mother's grief on top of her own. "Catherine," she breathed, opening her arms. They held each other tightly, there on the threshold of the home where Catherine had grown up. When they finally separated, Eleanor ushered her inside, taking her coat, fussing in the way she'd once been known for. "What brings you all this way?" she asked as they settled in the kitchen with tea. "Is everything all right with David and the children?" Catherine nodded, curling her hands around the mug. "Everyone's fine. She hesitated, then met Eleanor's eyes directly. "I've been worried about you, ever since the big storm last month, when I couldn't reach you for 3 days. Eleanor smiled, remembering how the phone lines had been down. "I was perfectly fine. Better than fine, actually." "So I've heard," Catherine said, surprising her. "I called Mrs. Hendrickson at the church to check on you, and she told me you're practically running the whole neighborhood now. Story hour at the library, baking classes for kids, checking on elderly neighbors." A mixture of amazement and confusion colored her voice. "Mom, what happened?" Eleanor considered how to answer. How could she explain Gabriel? The mysterious visitor who had awakened her to life again, who might have been an actual angel, or perhaps just a homeless man with extraordinary insight. Did it really matter which? "I had a visitor during the storm," she said simply. "Someone who reminded me that I still have much to give, that I matter." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "You've always mattered, Mom. I'm sorry if I made you feel otherwise. After Dad died, I didn't know how to help you. It seemed like you wanted to be alone." "I thought I did too," Eleanor admitted, "until I realized how empty aloneness can be." She reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. "But that's changing now. I'm changing." They talked for hours, really talked, in a way they hadn't since before Robert's death. Catherine shared her struggles balancing work and parenthood, her worries about her teenage son, her guilt about neglecting her mother. Eleanor listened with new understanding, offering not judgment but compassion. "Why don't you bring the family for Easter?" Eleanor suggested as the afternoon waned. "The guest rooms need airing out, but there's plenty of space. And Sophie, the little girl I'm teaching to bake, would love to meet her cousins." Catherine's face brightened. "Really? You'd be up for hosting everyone?" Eleanor smiled, thinking of how full her life had become in just 1 month. "I would love nothing more," she said truthfully. That evening, after Catherine had gone to bed in her childhood room, Eleanor sat alone in the living room. Robert's chair no longer seemed to dominate the space, though she hadn't moved it. She had stopped preserving the house as a mausoleum to her marriage and begun living in it again. She took the white feather from the small box where she kept it on the mantel, running her fingers along its impossibly soft edge. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if her words could reach wherever Gabriel had gone. "For granting my wish." Outside, a gentle spring rain began to fall, washing away the last of winter's snow. Eleanor moved to the window, watching the droplets trace patterns on the glass. Across the street, the bus stop bench where she'd first seen Gabriel stood empty. But Eleanor Matthews was no longer empty. Her heart, once a hollow chamber echoing with loss, now pulsed with reconnection, with purpose, with life renewed. A lonely widow had offered food to a homeless man, only to discover he was an angel sent to grant her wish. Not with magic or miracles, but by awakening her to the truth she'd forgotten, that the power to matter, to be remembered, to find purpose had always resided within her. She simply needed to open her door and let the world back in.